Hey, Emil.
Hey, what's going on, Kath?
Thanks for joining us here. Um, just coming down from it. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
And I've seen this film a few times because we also programmed it in Salute Your Shorts, which is a festival that I work for.
Yeah.
And I remember in a discussion at that festival, you talked a little bit about how this film it depicts violence without showing violence.
Yeah.
And I remember being kind of struck when you said that, because I felt like, but it totally does show violence, but at the same time it doesn't. And everything is seen and everything is alluded to, or everything is heard, I'm sorry, and everything's alluded to. And that feeling of fear is so prevalent, and that feeling of loss. But you made a lot of really important directorial decisions, so that you didn't, so as not to show the violence. And I was wondering if you could talk about that process of how you decided to shoot it.
Yeah. So I think really early on, we knew we weren't going to show any violence for two reasons. First, we never wanted to be exploitative or gratuitous or disrespectful. And then second, we knew that your imagination is scarier than anything we could show you. So it just didn't feel necessary to still like evoke those same feelings. So that was kind of our approach from the very beginning. I knew that sound design was literally going to be half the film. I set aside budget for it. It's written into the script. So I think from the very beginning, not only in terms of what we decide to show and not show, but also what you're hearing. And we have the two gunmen have different weapons so that you could differentiate between where they are physically from the sound of their weapons. And it was just always built in from the very beginning that we were not ever going to show any blood or any actual violence, and it would all be implied, like you said.
How did you decide to make a movie about this topic?
I think there's obviously tons of stuff happening in our world all the time. And I think as creatives, we're always asking ourselves, like, what can we do? How can we help? And with mass shootings specifically, it's just seemed like they were happening so frequently that people were starting to become a little numb to them. And I just felt like we understand on an intellectual level that these things occur, and now they're just getting boiled down to like a headline that lists like casualties and the wounded. And I just felt like that was really unfair to the people that have been through these situations, whether they survived or not. And so I wanted to bring the audience into the classroom and help them develop a better emotional understanding of what these situations would actually feel like. So that was the objective of making the film, and also dictated a lot of the creative decisions that we made.
Yeah, I love that. I love that we actually have moments with the students in the beginning and get to understand what their own personal worlds are like, and get to understand more about the teacher and what kind of teacher she is. Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like our in some ways our films are kind of related because they both touch on violence and, grapple with questions of how to depict these sorts of stories that are very relevant to our times, but also maybe a truth about our times that we don't want to admit.
Yeah.
Is true.
Yeah. And I feel like you also made a similar choice at the end where, you see her get shoved, but beyond that, it's what you're hearing and what you're imagining. And I feel like that kind of leaves you with that sick feeling in your stomach. So can I jump in with questions too?
Yeah, well, real briefly, it's interesting because we actually did shoot that multiple ways.
Okay.
And in the edit, we're like, we have to stay removed because it just felt too like gratuitous and too, I don't know, gross, I think.
Yeah.
Actually see her. But yeah, please, if you have questions.
Yeah, I have so many questions. So I feel like this is really relevant, just to, again, like the political climate right now. But I think as writers and filmmakers, there's a lot of pressure on us. We hear a lot of times that our protagonists and our main characters in general, that they need to be likable. especially when they're female characters. I feel like there's
Mm.
an extra burden for female characters to be likable, especially if they're the protagonists. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's funny because other people have asked like, oh, am I supposed to like Wendy or should I be rooting for her, whatever? And my answer is like, I love Wendy. I
Yeah,
think I find her to be, I mean, maybe likable isn't the right word, but like very relatable. Um, and yeah, I think so. Like, my whole intention behind creating this film was because I'd heard about a true story that happened in LA
hmm
with a group of parachute kids or Chinese teenage immigrants.
hmm
And that's sort of what the story was inspired by. And so when I heard about this act of violence that had occurred, I sort of wanted to, I had a lot of empathy for these young people who were living here away from their families without support systems and struggling, and wanted to sort of explore how one might end up feeling violently or wanting to commit an act of violence. And
right.
so humanizing that journey, I guess. So when you ask about likability, it's an interesting question because I guess, yeah, I think of, I feel a lot of empathy for Wendy and I feel that she's very relatable. And I think for that reason, I think I like her. But
hmm Yeah, it's interesting because like I kind of like and dislike both of them. Like I feel kind of mixed on both of them, and it kind of varies at times. And so I'm curious, why did you choose the two perspectives that you chose? Like, why did you make Wendy the way she is and Mei Ling the way she is?
yeah, I think Wendy's struggle has to do a lot with um, what she's lacking in her life. She's lacking support systems. She's lacking people that she can turn to who will
hmm
hear her out when she says that she's struggling.
hmm
And she's lacking the kind of financial resources that Mei Ling has. And so those things are kind of out of her control. And so Mei Ling is a different personality. She has a different way of viewing the world, but so much of that is also shaped by what she does have access to, which is
hmm
like parents that are more present and more active in her life,
Right.
better financial resources. And um, so I think in some ways that also kind of goes back to my feelings about why people commit acts of violence. And it often stems from this feeling of a lack of control or,
hmm
other psychological hardship.
hmm
Um, which is, speaking of your film, that's tough because it's like, man, how do you humanize, obviously you're not humanizing the school shooter in your film, but it's hard to grapple with the fact that people actually commit acts like that in our world, you know?
Yeah. So tragically, so the El Paso shooting happened the very next day after we wrapped production. We finished on a Friday, and then Saturday was the El Paso shooting, which
Mm.
is essentially this story but at a Walmart instead of a school, which was honestly like devastating. Like I was exhausted. I came home. I went to sleep. I woke up to that news.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's horrible, and I mean, we've had a break right now because we're all quarantined, but it's not like any of the underlying causes or factors have gone anywhere. We're just all at home. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
What was it like working with actors um, who were playing school shooters? Like, how did they deal with it? How did you hire them? What was that relationship like?
yeah, it's a great question. I found a lot of times that actors, especially if they're kind of earlier on in their career, they will tend to judge their character. And one of the two was very concerned about how he would be perceived, and he made it very clear to me, this is not who I am. I would never do anything like this. I don't share these views. I would never act like this. And so I think my job as a director is to make every actor feel, understand where their character is coming from, and understand that their character is not them and it's not a reflection on them.
Mhm.
And to give them the perspective that their character has. And most people in the world just outside of characters. Most people believe that whatever they're doing is the right thing. And so I needed these two gentlemen to believe that what they are doing is the right thing. And so for me, I had to get myself in that headspace and then get them there so that they could give me the performances that I needed. So, the audience would buy this.
Wow.
So it was challenging. And like afterwards you feel kind of sick, but to make an effective film, like we needed to do that.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, because you could have easily just been like, okay, now you're going to walk into this classroom and like make sure that you stand with a posture that seems like you're angry. You could have easily just sort of like built out the physicality of it without necessarily delving into the psychological.
Um,
Um,
no, I literally had them create backstories. How did you guys meet? What was your plan? What was your backup plan? How long have you been planning? What is the
wow.
goal? What does success look like? I mean, I wanted them to get like into this mindset and knowing that their characters are different and they were approaching it differently. And then, we didn't actually write lines for them because the whole intention was to hear and see whatever the teacher hears, and we knew she was going to be in her classroom. But we still, thanks to our sound department, we put lavs on them, and they're actually like they're talking to each other. And
Oh my
I brought the
gosh.
sound down because I didn't want the audience to hear most of it. But the little things that you're hearing is their actual conversation about like what they were going to do and why it was important, and that they weren't going to fail, and they really got into it. And it's horrible, but wow, time went fast. But
I know. I like feel like I could just keep talking to you for hours. I mean, that's fascinating that you actually went the distance and took the time to think about like why would someone do this. Um yeah. Sorry, Brenton. We're
Come
just
on, my presence means you stop. No, I'm just kidding. No, Ebo, I didn't want you to stop. I'm sorry about that. It's so awkward jumping right in the middle of you two. I could literally listen to you two talk about the craft of storytelling and filmmaking for so long. I think what's really interesting is that there's two distinctly like kind of psychologies that you're entering into for both of you guys, right? For you have Mei Ling, you have Wendy, you have the shooters, you have the teacher, and of course you have the students as well.
Mhm.
And that willingness to be brave enough to have the courage to actually live in those characters, that's quite amazing. So we got a few questions. I'm
Okay.
going to dive in and probably try to consolidate some like I did before. First off, I just want to say these films were incredible. For Kath's film, I've loved Parachute for so long. Wendy, for everybody, so I just got to tell everybody, she's a spitting image of my mom when she was 20. So it's the weirdest thing to watch. Like literally, I sent pictures of Wendy to my brother, and she's like, "Oh wow, it's a good picture of mom." So, anyways, in Emil, like watching that film as a dad, that's gonna bring my kid to school, my daughter to school within a few years. That
yeah.
was I haven't had that feeling watching a film in probably a few years. So that was incredible and really really hard. So let's get to the questions. Kath, one thing that kept on coming up for you in the live chat is talk about composition. Like you made very decisive and distinct choices in how you framed your film, and also you withheld a lot too, right? There's that violence in the end, but there's also you withheld the body of Wendy dancing and you sat on her shadow, right? So there's a lot of really distinct directorial and decisions just when it comes to shooting. Like what's your process in that?
Yeah, so we actually we at first were thinking about doing handheld because we felt like maybe that would mirror the kind of anxious energy that Wendy has, but then we realized that that wasn't quite appropriate for her character. She's actually someone who deeply internalizes a lot of things. And so we decided to take a different approach and use a lot more restraint. And so my cinematographer and I basically just spent a long time thinking about every single scene, every single beat. Whose scene is it? What's the effect of what's happening in this exchange? And yeah, I think we pulled a lot of inspiration from the film Cold War, actually. So we looked at some of those compositions when we were thinking about how we wanted to frame people. But in terms of like where characters were in the frame, that a lot of that we decided based on, you know, who was in power in each scene, who, yeah, wanted to get something out of someone else in each scene, those types of, you know, psychological decisions, I guess. Yeah.
Very cool. There's like, I mean, Cold War is one of the most beautiful films I've seen in the past like
Right.
5 years, and there's definitely beautiful parallels there.
Mhm.
Cool. A lot of people are asking about casting. I'm gonna bring this over to Emil. I think it's, casting with your film's big. I mean, you're also dealing with a lot of child actors. So I guess the question is, there's two questions I'll ask you. One is like, what was your process for casting the principal actor, but also the children as well? And then as you're leading up to shooting, what are you walking them through, given the subject matter, given how it's going to be on the day, the intensity of it all, and then what does it look like on the day when you're actually finally leading that pretty massive cast like through a very intense story? I know that's a pretty big question, but if you could kind of dive into that a bit, that'd be cool.
I'll keep each segment brief.
Okay.
So for the kids, they came from a variety of sources, all the way from like Arlette Flores, our casting director, going into like East Oakland and Fruitvale and waiting outside of Mass for parents to come or families to come out, and then approaching the parents and telling them about what we want to do, to casting agencies. We posted on Backstage, like you name it. Some were literally like neighbors or friends of other kids that we had cast. So the kids kind of came from all throughout the Bay Area. Other than the siblings, I think we had two pairs of siblings. None of the other kids knew each other. They don't go to school together or anything like that. And then for Pharrell, who played Miss Lena, I met Pharrell in a directing class that I was taking in LA. And I didn't actually get to work with her, but she just like popped out, obviously, like same like in the film. And I just knew I had to work with her, and I ended up writing the film for her specifically. And then as far as the process, I taught like an hour-long class on everything we did to work with the kids. But it came down to like, we really just, from the very beginning, we shared the entire script with the parents, made sure that they went through the entire script, read it in its entirety, were comfortable with it. If they were, they then read it with their kids. Then they brought them into the audition, had the parents in the room. And so we tried to really like create an environment where everybody knew what we were doing. There were no surprises. No one was surprised, from the school to the parents to the crew. Very early on in the process, we did have a lot of people like drop out. Even before, like when we were casting and crewing, a lot of people had, again, like if I was interested in somebody on the crew, I would say, hey, I'd love to work with you on this. But before you say yes or no, please read the script and then let me know if you're comfortable. So that was kind of our process, just full transparency. And then as far as like the harder stuff, I mean, we purposely shot as much in order as we could. And, so our first day is, here's the kids in the class, they're saying the pledge, they're painting, and then progressively it gets darker and darker. And on the beginning of day 3, which is our last day with the kids and our heaviest day, we just had a conversation. So the Gilroy shooting had happened about a month before that, and we talked about that. And I made the decision to show them the picture of a little boy who had passed away. He was 6. And I said, like, I need you to understand that you are representing this little boy and all the other people that have been in all these situations. And I need you to take it really seriously and do your very best. And they did. And it was remarkable to see 20 kids just like really embrace that challenge and really understand the seriousness of what they were portraying. And then throughout our day, anytime it kind of got off track, I would just bring them back to that. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't a fun conversation to have, but it was definitely necessary, because they weren't exposed to any violence. They didn't hear any gunshots. They weren't there when the guys were there. It was a totally different day. So a lot of this is coming from their imagination and following Pharrell's lead, and then the environment that we created.
That's incredible.
That was my line. No, but seriously, I mean, I think that your process is full of real, like, I mean, just this level of integrity that you invested in. And it's not easy to do that no matter what film you make. Keeping people fully in the loop, and there's this level of integrity and accountability across the board for all your crew and cast, but you also being courageous enough to use real life to bring and cultivate a world. Yeah, props to you on that in a big way. It seems like you really made some. I mean, the outcome is incredible, but how you did it the right way as well.
Thank you.
It was really cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, man, we ended off with two incredible filmmakers. And I think, Emil, this is when we say goodbye to you, and Kath can put on her other hat real quick.
I still have so many more questions.
I know. I literally, I asked you one out of like 6 questions I wrote down.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having me. I'll duck out. Thank you so much.